Greetings. I'm Mimi Kirk of the Institute for Middle East Studies at George Washington University, and I'm pleased to speak with Dr. Jessica Barnes, Associate Professor in the Department of Geography at the University of South Carolina. Dr. Barnes's research examines the culture and politics of resource use and environmental change in the Middle East. Her first book, Cultivating the Nile, The Everyday Politics of Water in Egypt, is an ethnographic study of water and the politics surrounding its use. I'm speaking today with Dr. Barnes in relation to the 2009 Middle East Report article, Damietta Mobilizes for its Environment by Jeannie Sowers and Sharif Elmusa. Dr. Barnes, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation to join you.
So first, I wanted to talk about the protests that occurred there, more than 10 years ago now. So the article traces how a variety of residents in Damietta, and this included local elites, fishermen, other residents, came together to protest the construction of the new fertilizer plant. And we were hoping you could speak to the importance of the Nile and the Mediterranean and the area around Damietta and the repercussions of industry like fertilizer production on the environment.
Yeah, the Nile is obviously such a vital resource for Egypt. It's a source of by far the majority of the country's water. It really is an absolutely critical resource. But what's interesting when thinking about it around Damietta, and this isn't an area where I've conducted fieldwork, I should say that as a kind of caveat, so it's not an area that I know specifically. But by the time the Nile, in fact, very little Nile water reaches Damietta and reaches the Mediterranean. So much is extracted for irrigation before it gets there. So I think what you see in Jeannie Sowers' article is actually some of the multiple parties who are mobilizing around the environment. And as I read it, as I read between the lines there, I wouldn't be, she does talk about how fishermen were concerned about the impact on the water. But to me, the dominant voice that came across were the local elites who have vacation houses who are worried about how this plant would affect their local environment. So to me, this didn't read as a case where concerns about the Nile were actually the dominant factor.
So the protesters were successful at getting that particular plant blocked. But regardless of that, since the article was published, in 2009, the fertilizer processing in that area has expanded in a number of ways. So, I would love it if you would bring us up to date a little bit, however much you can, about the Nile and industry on the Nile or around the river and the Mediterranean basin as well. If you could speak to that, thank you.
Again, without knowing the specifics of this case, it doesn't surprise me that the fertilizer industry has actually expanded since this date. The Nile is vital for Egypt, but so are fertilizers absolutely vital to Egypt. Ever since the construction of the high dam back in the 60s and the depletion of kind of the regular inundation of silt on the agricultural land from the Nile flood, the use of fertilizers has become ever more important. And it's also the sort of new varieties of crops that have been introduced over the last few decades. So Egypt has actually one of the highest rates of fertilizer application in the world. I think it's in the top 10 in terms of fertilizer usage. So from the government's perspective, having a good supply of fertilizer, having fertilizer produced in a way that's not too expensive is really important. But in terms of the kind of update on the Nile, I think the key issue today with the Nile isn't so much concerns about water quality that might come from industrial. In the case of this particular industry, it seems like the dominant concern was one of potential pollution from that industry. There are other industries that can actually be quite water intensive, in which you might be concerned about abstractions from the river. But I think the key issue today is more one related to the amount of water flowing down and questions surrounding the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and how that's going to affect flows down the river. So I think that's the kind of dominant concern as I understand it in the current moment.
Yeah, thanks for that, for bringing us up to date a little bit on what are the issues that are at the forefront of people's minds. And maybe we can talk about that next a little. Are we seeing activism? Are we seeing protesters around water issues in terms of the dam in Ethiopia, or in any other way? Are there updates in that way, or are we not seeing that so much anymore?
I think it's just striking to read this article at the current moment.
Mm.
It really seems to me it was published in 2009. You can see sort of some parallels with some of the rhetoric that then surrounded the revolution. And you can also see the contrast with today. This isn't my particular area of expertise, but the thought of this kind of mobilization happening in today's Egypt seems very surprising. I couldn't imagine it happening today. One of the things I've reflected on over the years of my working in the Middle East is the limited resonance of the term environment. So, in the translation in Arabic, it just doesn't resonate in the same way that it does in English and among, say, audiences in the United States. So if you said to me, how vibrant would you say environmental activism is in Egypt, which is where I've done my field work, I would say pretty limited. The Ministry of the Environment, for example, is a ministry that doesn't hold very much power. It's not kind of at the cutting edge. But if you said, do people care about their water supply? Do they care about basic food and agricultural production? Absolutely, like people really care about those basic needs. And so I suppose it depends on how you're defining the environment. But to me, when I think about the environment in quite kind of capacious terms, then certainly people are deeply engaged and concerned about their water supplies and about, kind of core issues of agricultural production that are so closely tied to the environment.
We've been talking with Dr. Jessica Barnes for IMPOP, or the IMES-MERIP Public Outreach Partnership. Thanks again.
Thank you.